it really needs to start with a people connection before we move into any kind of process improvement. As leaders, we have to make sure that we understand that simple training is not equal empowerment. We now have to offer the
Yeah.
encouragement and the opportunity for people to use these new tools that we gave them.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Dan Barata. Dan is the corporate director of continuous improvement at the Disney World of Battery Production, otherwise known as East Penn Manufacturing. Dan has over 30 years of process and systems improvement experience across multiple industries, joined East Penn in 2024, and has helped deploy their continuous improvement strategy across multiple divisions and sites. Dan is a licensed industrial engineer with a bachelor's from Penn State and an MBA from Kutztown University. He's a certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and he's committed to continuous learning and servant leadership. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Keith, great to be with you.
Awesome. I love the term you used, the Disneyland of battery production. That sounds like just a fun place to go see how batteries are made.
Absolutely. Great footprint here.
Yeah, you said it was the largest single site for battery production in
Yeah,
the
lead
US,
acid
in the
battery.
world?
Yes. Over
Cool.
500 acres here in Line Station, PA.
Well, that sounds quite interesting. Well, Dan, I know we've known each other for a few years. I'm excited to get a chance for our podcast listeners to get to know you a little bit. You've got an interesting journey. I know that you're passionate about this thing we call continuous improvement. The first question I like to ask is about the spark. I find for a lot of people, there's like a moment that they remember where they got, intrigued with this discipline. I'm wondering for you, what was that spark for you?
Well, Keith, it's probably went back to my college days at Penn State. I chose industrial engineering primarily because that was a engineering discipline that did have people as a central variable to it, if you will. And with that, it was, systems improvement, but along with whatever system we were working in, how people were involved in it, how it affected them, I was drawn to that. So as my career grew and started to interact more with all different types of processes and systems, it really kept coming back to, well, what are the methods and approaches to ensure it's not just an ergonomic improvement for people, but also removing some of the frustrations and issues that they may see every day and what they're working in. So that's where my passion was kind of gravitated to, and how I picked up with TQM and Baldrige and Six Sigma and all the lean and all the methodologies that came along.
So that's interesting. So you actually started in college down this path of industrial design. What was the first like paid job that you had out of college? Where were you working at?
Oh, that was back in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. I actually worked for a subsidiary of Berg Electronics, and there I got my first taste of really manufacturing, some manual, some automated as well. And that the initial job was looking at how our instructions are put together and how people interpret and learn from and use those work instructions. So that gave me a really quick education on, what may make sense for one person in a vacuum putting something together versus how many people have to utilize and make sure they're effective with it.
Well, that's an interesting topic. We'll have to drill in deep on work instructions a little bit. Do you recall what your first job title was there?
I believe it was industrial engineer and then slash documentation engineer.
Slash documentation engineer. So tell us a little bit about some of the other stops along the career path. When you left there, where did you go next?
After that, stayed in a telecommunications type role with a organization in Lewisburg, PA. Worked with some clients such as Lucent, Northern Telecom, Unisys, some of the early banking and telecommunication players. Then from there, went on to the building products industry, working for Armstrong World Industries. That's where I picked up my initial black belt and then later on my master black belt certification as well. Also finalized my PE license too. And then from there, I went to pharmaceutical packaging for Thermo Fisher Scientific. I then worked on my MBA while I was there. A lot of great learning around process improvement and that industry as well. Tried my hand at consulting for a couple of years, and to be honest with you, it was fulfilling from the standpoint of I got to work in the healthcare industry there. And if there's no better motivation than seeing that you're helping systems that help people get better, I don't know what is. So I drew a lot from that. But to be honest with you, I appreciate what consultants do. But for me, it was tough not being part of the home team. As soon as I would build that relationship, it was almost time to move on to that next opportunity. So after that, I moved into medical device industry. I worked for Braun Medical. I was there for a little over 10 years. Again, got to grow not only acumen around these improvement methodologies that we talk about, but really diving into what it means to be a servant leader and helping folks that are in your charge. That became very important to me. And then just recently, as you mentioned, I've now joined East Penn and feel very blessed to have gotten this opportunity in now automotive manufacturing, which is where we find ourselves today.
That's so interesting. I mean, some of the things that I'm hearing there is that first of all, worked across a number of industries from electric, building things in electronics. It's kind of a pattern there. Building materials like stuff that is used to build houses and buildings and things like that, I'm assuming. Medical devices, is that primarily what Braun was involved in?
Yes, when you think of anything that goes on that tower next to the hospital bed, Braun has a
Mm,
hand.
all that stuff. And now batteries. Batteries are one of those things that I guess, maybe naively I would think like, oh, that's kind of an unsexy thing. But now with like EVs and AI, like now all of a sudden it feels like this very innovative kind of space. Like there's probably a lot of newness and innovation happening in that space. Maybe you could give us a little insight into
Yes,
that.
and they're obviously a focus on power these days, and East Penn does serve a variety of sub-industries within that. It's not only the automotive and truck batteries, but train, the storage power, things that make sure that our hospitals stay online in case there ever is a power outage. So there's a lot of reserve power, motive power, with our forklifts and things of that nature. So really anything that utilizes a battery for industrial commercial use, East Penn I believe has a hand in. And as you noted, as far as the new technologies as well, East Penn is looking into those as well.
So with some people's career paths, like, somebody was like, oh, I love cars. And, like they're working all around automobile manufacturing and maybe batteries is a step along the way. I mean, you've been involved in a lot of different things. What would you say is like the pattern for you? What is the thing that's interesting about the work that has, kind of been true through your journey?
Probably been lucky that my passion has been people centric. And what I mean by that is I got to work in a variety, obviously, of industries, but I also get to work in a variety of functions and departments within each of these organizations. So it's a newness as far as the environments, but it's always the same familiar passion I have as far as okay, how are people interacting with this process? 'Cause at the end of the day, it's comes down to inputs, process, and outputs. What you try to work to is understand, what people are challenged with, in some of these processes. So what I take from is trying to number one understand, be a good listener, and figure out, what potential opportunities we have to move forward with it. As you know, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners do, is there's a number of different methodologies and tools, a lot of overlap in them, but it really comes down to is, what are you looking to solve? What is that problem? If you can focus in on that, then it's a little bit easier to select what the best vehicle for improvement will be.
So, kind of drilling into that same idea, what are some of the problems that people are facing or companies are facing that you've seen that are like true across each of these organizations that you've been at?
Central to at least the idea of creating a CI environment, fostering that improvement mindset is really moving from having the tools and being trained to the tools instead of starting there is really understanding why are we doing this in the first place? Because I think if we just go in with, say, a checklist of, okay, do we train everybody on FAST? Did we train everybody on root cause analysis? Is to go in with, what we're looking to do as a company, you know, at the end of the day, what's our mission, vision, or whatever you may call it, with where you're at. And then what are our biggest challenges that where we want to get to. And once we start there, then it's a little bit easier to start to bring in the appropriate training, the appropriate energy, because that's probably the first hurdle. That the next hurdle is to know that it's not just about training people on these new tools. It's also, as leaders, we have to make sure that we understand that simple training is not equal empowerment. We now have to offer the encouragement and the opportunity for people to use these new tools that we gave them. I've seen so many times, especially when we're working with frontline associates, we may roll out some wonderful training, and then we ask, what have you been doing with it? Which we should be saying, where we been doing with it. If they're being tasked with actuating a machine for 420 minutes out of a 480-minute shift, where did we give them the opportunity to utilize what they just learned? So it's not easy, but I think that's why you have to be very tailored and customized to whoever you're working with, whether organization, plant wise, department wise, what makes most sense for that particular environment.
You said something that I think is really interesting. I want to ask you to drill into what you just said about training does not equal empowerment. What does that mean?
Yeah, and I think sometimes, and I've been guilty of it in the past as well, is you believe simply by uh, showing and training, someone on a new tool, new approach to problem solving, if you will, organization, whatever it may be, that that person now is suddenly empowered to utilize it. There's nothing stopping that person. That if it's not being done, it's that person not wanting to, and I think that is very key. That as leaders, we need to make sure that we're providing that opportunity, and that's sometimes what happens. We'll go in and we'll peanut butter, entire department with particular training, and just assume everybody turns into these community of problem solvers that we were looking for, and that's where the leadership engagement is so important, and a routine engagement, not, hey, we had that training back in March. What have we been doing about it? It's up to that management group, that leadership group, to continually be engaged and say, okay, we had that training. How have we utilized it? You haven't had the opportunity yet. Let's see if we can organize something and coordinate, that opportunity for you.
I want to come back to a couple of things that you mentioned about your journey there. You mentioned it sounds like you got your black belt relatively early in your career at one of the first few places. Do you remember how you got introduced to the idea of what a black belt was, and kind of what set you on that path of I need to get my black belt?
Yeah, you're going to date reference me now on some things that, but there was a philosophy held by many companies, I will say early 2000s. A lot were taken from the pages of the GE handbook, as far as, Jack Welch. And obviously he was a extraordinary advocate of the Six Sigma methodology. So a lot of companies would come in and say, you know what, we want to make sure we have at least a green belt level certification for most of the people that we have in our organization. And then we will sprinkle in the appropriate black belts as well. And what potentially I was part of one of those initial rollouts. And it was great for me because it fell right in line with the types of interests that I had. It just added to my ability to potentially help people more in what I was being asked to do. But I think what we've seen, and some things that we just talked about before, is you almost overclog a system with the ability to improve, but not opportunities to improve. And then those skills that are just learned tend to languish with atrophy if you don't use it. So unfortunately, we may have not have seen the return on investment for something like that. But that's initially how I was brought into it. Now there was a lot of good that came out of it, but those are lessons that you keep, the do's and the not so much do's that you carry with you.
Yeah, I think that's there's an interesting storyline that I find just, for folks listening in on this around, things that we learned or believed to be true, and then, we took that knowledge and we rammed it up against some real world problem, and we realized, maybe it worked once, maybe it worked twice, maybe it worked three times, but then in this next situation, it didn't work at all, and you kind of learn something new. I'm curious if with your experiences, I'm sure you've had a few of those where there was an idea that you were taught or something that you tried to implement, and then maybe the real world threw it back in your face like, nope, that's not going to work, or you got to do something different. Are there a few lessons along those lines that you picked up on that maybe weren't part of the instruction that you received from the textbook, so to speak?
Yes, and part of it, I mean, there's a number of different things. Great methodologies, and really any method that you pick, it's usually chock full of some well-intentioned tools that have definitely their place in your path for improvement. And I think it's important that you always note, what is the primary reason that you went in there, and who are your stakeholders. And when I say that, stakeholder to me is anybody that gives to, gets from, or exists in that process, and to really keep them at the forefront of whatever type of analysis that you start to look at, whatever type of improvements that you start to look at as well, is make sure you stay in constant communication. One of the lessons I know I had learned early on as a black belt is to not go too deep into a particular path of analysis or even potential solutions if I'm not staying in that constant communication. Because what I found is I could be working on something that, what, at the end of the day is not going to be a primary help to the person that is front line to what this issue is. It may help something somewhere else, but I may be only sub-optimizing, this process, and not really making that big, improvement, especially for the people that are most impacted by it.
Okay, interesting. One thing that comes to mind, like you mentioned how earlier in your career you were a documentation specialist, working on like work instructions. And I think that in this discipline of improvement, there's kind of these like two tensions that we live between, right? Like one, is there a process to follow? And then, how do you get people to follow that process? And then how do you create space for improvement? Because improvement basically means doing something different than the current process. How do you help? What advice might you have to reconcile those two tensions between just do it the way you're told to do it and think about a new way to do it?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Keith. But the short answer we take out of our lean learning with standard work. All right, is there standard work? Number one, and if there was, what was the vehicle for communicating it? Was it a work instruction? What is it? Some kind of a visual that we're to follow? Was it just word of mouth? The last person that had that position, we just explained it to the next person that has it. So that's always usually their starting point is to, okay, is the standard being done? And if it's not, understand all the reasons why potentially what we thought was happening, this process isn't happening. Then once you feel good about that standard and it's being repeated, then we can start to talk about, where that realm for improvement is, because that initial work of improvement may just be getting us back to what we thought it should be before we can actually improve that process.
I like that. So you basically said a starting point for that is just the question of is there standard work? Like does it exist? And then if it does exist, are we following it? Because yeah, sometimes it exists and they're not following it. And then sometimes it doesn't exist. Is there a time that you can think of that was impactful where the answer to the question, is there standard work, was, well, no, not really?
Several, and you'll find that in any number of processes, but a lot that have evolved over time, where the standard operating procedure did not keep up with whatever latest better ways of doing things, maybe new technologies, people with better ideas just started doing it or thinking they were improving it, and nothing was really brought back to ensuring that standard was then communicated across all parts of the organization. So yeah, there are a number of opportunities and examples that I can remember. But using that example of some grandfathered types of processes, those were really the ones that were wrought with. Maybe it's just a matter of documenting this best practice that we have going on in one of the shifts and just ensuring that the rest of the shifts are have that available too, whether it is a new technology or just a better path to whatever that method is. That to me was where we'd see that repeating. It is the things that we've been doing for years and years, not understanding why all of a sudden that the separation of performance that we might see between shifts, between departments, between plants that are doing similar type of processes.
You just touched on something that I find super interesting about this discipline is if you just have one site or one shift doing something, It's just the way that you do it, whatever it is, right? But if you've got multiple sites, multiple shifts, I mean, multiple salespeople doing something, like you're going to have differences between how one person, one shift, one site does something and another. And I find that it's interesting that a lot of times, I guess, like whether you call it go to the Gimba or just observation or just being self aware, it's hard for us as individuals to like recognize the way we do it, because a lot of times we kind of think like, well, I just assume everybody does it the way I do it. This is the way that you do it. But I think that there's something about that CI role specifically to observe and to recognize, hey, there's a difference between how we're doing it in these two places. Do you have any examples of times where you've found like real opportunities to improve based on, something happening differently across sites or shifts?
Yeah, you actually touch on something that really in the last probably 7 to 10 years that I think has really come evident to me is the opportunities are not just central to the production floor. What we're finding is so many more opportunities on the transactional side. All the functional support groups that enable, the value to be added on the production floor, just, through supply chain, through our HR processes, our engineering process, all these that really have to be coordinated and commingled together to make sure that we can serve our client the way we hope to. But that opens up to your question is how do we purchase for a particular site? How do we schedule for a site? What are our hiring practices for a certain site? So all those types of processes now open themselves up to we don't really actually have standard work from that. That was just something Lisa knew how to do, but potentially because someone else had to pick that up and in lieu of Lisa, we now did not get parts on time, which we look as a production issue, but potentially if they never had them, we got to make sure we ask why enough so that we actually go where
Yeah.
the root cause of that is.
I think that's a super interesting insight right there. One, that there's processes that are happening all over these organizations that we all work in. Some of them are manufacturing. At KPI Fire, we tend to work with a lot of manufacturing people, but of course, every company that makes something has a sales and marketing function to sell it, and they have a finance, function to figure out how to send the money and receive the money. So like, there's a lot of core processes, and they all need improvements. There are some times that I think are particularly ripe for finding holes in processes, and you mentioned a couple like transition, somebody leaves, somebody new comes in. Vacations I've found are another super interesting time to see like how solid is our process when somebody goes on vacation, particularly like for more than a few days? Like, does
So
something stop happening that nobody else knew was happening? That's interesting.
right, we always joke around. What if Joe wins the lottery? What
Yeah.
it's and that gives you at least pause to look at some processes that only Joe knows how to do.
Yeah. That's those are some super good insights there. So I am curious in your new role, relatively recent. So this is more modern history, but with all of the previous experiences that you had, knowing that every company is different and there's not necessarily one roadmap to follow, I'm curious if there was like a bit of a checklist that you went through when you landed in this new role and you said, okay, let me kind of audit how we're doing these different things. What are some of those things that you went through and said, okay, are we doing this? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? And what was the sequence and what were some of the things that were on your checklist?
Yeah, hopefully, as I've gone through my career, I've learned, not just from the wins, but the lessons, and I think it's important for all of us. And in my latest position now, which it's again has been a great opportunity for me, is I wanted to come in and make sure I was very tempered with, understanding exactly not only our industry, but also, the processes and the players within that. So it's a lot of curiosity, it's a lot of questions, it's a lot of listening, which believe me, I'm not here to tell you that I'm the perfect listener when it comes to that. I'm sure some folks would voice in on that one, but it really helps me. And I found that pause. And sometimes you feel like you go in and you have to hit the ground running and be all thunder and lightning and look what I did. And it really, I found myself just talking to some, really great folks here that have been doing this type of work, whether it was improvement work or just the actual business to business things that we're doing here at East Penn. That helped me so much more. And again, that's something that Dan Barata maybe 20 years ago, wouldn't have taken that breath and that beat to say, okay, let's really bring all this in, because there, as I told you, that there's a lot here. We have several divisions, over more than a dozen, plants, and we have a lot of things going on. But I think that bodes well for anything that you walk into, is try not to assume too much, even if it's a business you're familiar with. It's just really, you know, talk, listen, ask a lot of questions. People will want to share those with you, especially when you start to build those relationships and they start to share some of the things that they're challenged with. That's when you can potentially introduce some options. And again, don't deliver them as the end all silver bullet, because I think together is what you want to stress. We will figure some things out. And it's not a matter of just look at chapter 12 in this book and I'll come back in 2 months and see how you did.
Yeah.
You really want to stay shoulder to shoulder with people once you really understand their why and the things that they're challenged with. That was probably my biggest thing coming into this role, is how much time I really stay disciplined to that approach.
So I'm hearing like don't just jump in with a prescription and a list of things to do as much as listen carefully, which I think is great advice. Particularly, even more important, the more senior the role is as an organization, is to take a proper amount of time to assess the situation. So when you were in that curiosity state of mind, what are some like specific examples of questions that you would use in those rooms? Like you kind of hit on a couple of them. Maybe you could go into a little more detail. Like you said, like what are the processes, and as an example.
Yeah, well, I mean, coming into my particular role here, there was a whole lot that I needed to learn about the battery industry. Period. So any opportunity that I could get for someone that would escort me around the floor in a manner that not only showed me what was going on, but given the opportunity to talk with people that were engaged in some of those processes and activities and equipment, I think really helped me out and helped speed that learning curve. Then once we start from really where the value is added, right at the front line, and then we can kind of back into all the supporting roles, and you start to connect the pieces between, here's where we're challenged, here's where we think some of our issues are coming from, here's the work that we had done in the past, here's some of the approaches that we used. Because as and you deal with a number of companies, when you come in, odds are, unless you're coming into a company that just started a few months ago, they probably tried some things before. You don't want to be at all dismissive about those efforts, and whatever lessons learned from those, you want to make sure that those are captured in those conversations as well, so that you don't go over old ground or just seem that you're not interested in the prior learning that they've come to. So that those questions, really have to be a balanced portfolio of under getting to know that person. I think the relationship building cannot be overestimated as far as that goes. Is making sure that people feel that for the home team, right? As I talked about earlier, we're in this together, and then we can start to talk about what we're being asked to do and the hurdles that prevent us from doing that. Whether it's routinely we see it, or once in a while this happens, and then you start to back through all the other folks that have been trying to help with that particular issues that there was. So you get that fuller picture. And you could be here a number of years before you have the whole picture. But the idea is, where can we go in and start to help and support in a manner that makes sense. And that's primarily what we try to do.
So I'm kind of picturing this like scenario where the senior executives in the companies probably have this like persona stereotype of being like demanding and like, hey Dan, I want you to come in and make things better. You're a black belt. Go talk to our people and make things better. Let's just pretend like that's kind of the scenario, right? Like a little bit just they don't have time for it, maybe. It's like the stereotype. And then
Absolutely.
what's that? Yeah, and I want it yesterday. Yeah, like that's funny. Best way to interact with a senior executive is just know, yes, they want it all, and when do they want it? They want it yesterday. Like that's just, that's a good starting point. Okay, so let's say you take that like overly demanding approach, which probably isn't going to work great everywhere, and you're getting introduced to the folks on the floor. You mentioned like the front line and how important that initial interaction is. And that's one of those things where I think experience is probably the best teacher in that scenario. So whether you're like the manager who's introducing the line worker to this new person, Dan Barata, or whether you're Dan getting introduced, like what are some like specific things that you say to create that relationship? Because I think the last thing you want is somebody feeling like, oh my gosh, who's this new guy that they brought in? Am I going to get fired? What am I doing wrong? Like, I don't know. Any tips you can give us for how to create that good environment?
Again, I'm not the world renowned expert on this. I can tell you some of the things I had probably more success with is staying people centric. This is another person you're talking to, and that's one of the reasons why um, I although I love, being able to talk to you virtually like this, my preference is always, a person to person, face to face interaction. I think you start there. And some of your questions may have nothing to do with what particular area you're in and what problem you're about to solve. It really is, hey, so how long have you been here? What was your path to be either in this position or even how you came to East Penn? And that opens the door to potentially some other ways to build that relationship and get to know each other so that when the tougher conversations may need to be had or situations where more trust is needed, they feel and you feel tethered to that trust as well so that we can have maybe tougher conversations in the future because you're familiar with that person and you feel connected a little bit more because this person took a minute to actually know you as a fellow human being versus, oh, that is frontline associate 25A that works on the finishing line. That's not at all how this should work. It really needs to start with a people connection before we move into any kind of process improvement.
That's so interesting. Whether we can learn from good examples, we can learn from bad examples. Have you ever seen executives or people practicing in this discipline? You don't have to admit to the mistakes yourself, maybe, but you could use those as bad examples. Are there things that you would say are like definitely don't do it this way?
Oh, there's a number. I'm sure we've all seen them, and I've been guilty of some in the past. If just in general, uh, you know, to make sure that as a leader you provide an environment where it's okay to fail forward. I guess is one way of putting it. Providing that safe space for people to not only voice ideas but to try things out, and even if they don't work out, they know that they're supported, and they're not going to be left on their own to clean up a mess, if you will. I think that is really key for any type of leadership role. As Simon Sinek has a great quote: "It's not about being in charge of people; it's about taking care of the people in your charge." And I think that is very key to anything that you want to do as an organization. If your people aren't willing to try new things, it's very difficult to foster that improvement or CI mindset and environment because I'm just going to stay in my lane because Lord knows if this doesn't go right, I don't know what the repercussions might be. Probably not good. Versus, okay, we tried that out. What did we learn from it? And let's move on to the next thing. I think that is very because we have seen examples of, you know, unfortunately not feeling supported when the bright intention was there. It may have not followed through or resulted in what we had hoped for. So to feel at all admonished for that, again, it is not something that is going to, you know, really help establish that move forward, trying something new, get better type of mentality.
So, from the perspective of what, now let's start with maybe the senior leaders. What's the message that senior leaders should communicate? Like, let's pretend that maybe an organization didn't have, like, maybe they're adding a director or manager of continuous improvement at a site or at a corporate level, and they're kind of introducing, like, hey, this is something that we're committed to doing. What are some things that they could do with that message to make sure that it is well received?
You used a key word there, Keith, committed. Having that commitment, that dedication from leadership and anyone you put in those roles to foster that. But uh, we'll just use generalities. If our a VP of manufacturing or COO, whatever, identifies a need for continuous improvement, and we have now appointed a director or VP of continuous improvement, it can't stop there. We want a true engaged advocate for this type of environment, and we have to make sure it's not just a a senior exec that says, "Yes, we like that and I approve of it." That's not enough. It can't be a neutral party. It really has to be a more engaged party so that there's routine check-ins, there's rigor around understanding how are we doing, what do we still need, celebrating the small things. It doesn't always have to be some monumental innovation, but because those are few and far between, but we do have those smaller wins, those marginal wins along the way that can be just as celebrated, that helps continue that motivation, that momentum of getting better.
That's a good one. I heard a couple of things there that I want to just punctuate a little bit. You said committed, and then you said something about failing forward. So let me ask you to clarify. What's the difference between like it's okay to fail? Because sometimes you hear this, it's like, hey, you need to make it okay to fail, which conceptually I agree with, but just as like kind of a somewhat competitive person, like it just kind of grinds at my soul a little bit. Like I hate to fail, right? But you said something like failing forward. What's the difference between it's okay to fail and failing forward?
Yeah, and that's kind of a mindset too as well. Not all failures are created equal. The success is not necessarily the opposite of failure when that's mixed with we were looking for an opportunity to improve. It wasn't a failure of here. I was not even following along with what the standard work, and we all agreed this is what it was going to be, and a failure to be accountable to a responsibility that I had. To me, that's a different kind of situation versus we were just looking to incorporate, this new tool, this new method, this new technology. I'm like, you know what? It did not have the result that we had all hoped for, what we simulated for, all those things, and it failed. When we measured against whatever that good was supposed to be. Those are the type of things that I noticed failing forward. We were trying something in earnest to really succeed that we thought was going to, and unfortunately, it didn't. Those those types of failures almost should be celebrated from the standpoint of we learned something. We know a different path to go down now.
I love that. I think that's a great quote that first of all, not all failures are created equal. That's a great one. And then, I agree with you. I think one of the failures that's like less acceptable is a failure to follow what we said we were going to do. Like, hey, we're going to try this new thing. We're going to follow this process. Maybe it's a standard. Like we're going to set the standard. Failing to follow the standard is different, than like, maybe some other failures. Trying something and having it not turn out. You use the term learning lessons. Like I've heard people say something along the lines of like, "Hey, we either succeed or we learn something." So it's not a failure. We learned something. What did we
Yes,
learn?
absolutely. I appreciate that wordsmithing.
Yeah, no, and there's again, like as you're saying all these things, it connects in my brain like the tools that we learn are tools that can help us in these processes, right? Like you use the term curiosity to figure out like what is it that we do around here? How does this place work? I mean, that sounds a lot like a value stream mapping type tool exercise. Um, capturing best practices, documenting standard work. I mean, those are the tools to help you answer some of those questions. Lessons learned, like the retrospective kind of concept. These are the building blocks of improvement for sure. You did say routines. What are some of the routines that you like to see or that, you've experienced are best practices in your career?
Yeah, historically, and I'm sure you're familiar with the standard work concept, coming out of the lean toolbox as well. And I believe the closer you are to where that value is added, we'll use our production example again. It's probably easiest to develop your standard work there. Where it gets interesting is the further away you get from where the value is actually added or created, which is other discussions. Is what is the standard work for a director or a manager of HR or VP of manufacturing, like director of finance? What through the day makes it? Because even the director of finance has a Gemba. It may look a lot different than the welding department, but there are folks working within those systems that that person in that role can check in on and see what we're doing process wise, even if it's transactional in nature. So I think part of having that routine engagement of people that are in your charge is important, whether it's happening daily or weekly, but to make sure that everyone understands here's that routine support structure that we have. Here's a path that I will always have to voice the issues and challenges that I have. And this person will help me resolve those or remediate those as best we could. I think that's part of what that is because we know some of the roles we have every day is a new adventure, on some things. You don't know who's going to be calling your phone or what email you're going to get. But if there's some things that we can compartmentalize, that even if embedding that in your schedule from 9 to 11, you actually put it on your schedule on Tuesday and Thursday. No other meeting is going to be scheduled at this point. My door's closed. That is when I respond to email or whatever type of work that I'm doing a little bit all through the day and all these interruptions. I can kind of concentrate. You start to see some improvements as far as, wow, okay, I have more time to do some other things that maybe are adding more value in my mind on some things.
That sounds interesting. It sounds to me like we're talking a little bit about like leader standard work and how leaders can set up their schedule and their time to deal with the things that they need to. It's kind of funny, in lean we talk about single piece flow and all this stuff, but in leadership I found that batching can actually be a useful way of saving time for certain activities, rather than dealing with fires all the time, every time, kind of like batch. Okay, this is when I'm going to focus on this kind of an issue. So, yeah, that's interesting. You said something I want to come back to, and the question is like, what is the value add activities for CI professionals? You've obviously asked yourself that question. What are some of the answers that you've come up with?
Primarily in that role is identifying and enabling them. Truly, in its baseline, purest definition, the AI professionals are not adding value in the client's eyes. But what we are doing is making sure that, the efficient as efficient as we can be with that, as effective as we can be, with those processes that are to add value. We're minimizing the non-value added activities. Are if we can't remove them altogether, we at least minimize. We know some things are inherently non-value added, but they're necessary, whether through legalities, compliance, some things that go on there that we're required to do. I think as a CI professional, add value in the eyes of those you serve. At the end of the day, I know a couple times I've had conversations with people I reported to, and my performance review shouldn't be difficult from the standpoint of you that I report to shouldn't have to come up with a performance review. Ask the folks that I'm supposed to be serving. The message that they give you, that's my performance review. And are they being helped? Have they seen a difference in how they engage in their processes, how their people are engaging in processes? At the end of the day, that's what the CI professional is bringing.
So, let's talk a little bit about how we do measure this value add, and I'm kind of going to this direction of like hard versus soft savings and impact and different stakeholders. The CFO's definitely going to have like one way of evaluating the performance of every function in an organization. The people, the I don't know, the person working on the front line, maybe it's a pregnant mother, maybe it's somebody with a disability or something. Like, they're going to have kind of a different set of ways that you might be able to help them. When you think of like categories of impact, do you have a model or anything that you use that like hard savings versus soft savings might be one, or thank you letters that I receive from employees could be something like what's your framework for how you try to quantify the impact of CI?
Our hallmarks that we look for in our CI organization is we want to be able to provide opportunities for engagement. So an engagement is an important measure for us because that could be across anything. And what types of engagement? It could be training, it can be project work, it can be CI meetings that take place. Whatever those opportunities are to be involved in something outside that normal routine. That's important. Never losing sight of what our overall activity should be focused on. So making sure that we're aligned with whatever the main critical performance indicators are for our organization. Is our project work aligned to those most critical measures where the gaps are? So that alignment measure, if you will, is something that's very critical for us. And then we also want to understand, if how we assess the organization that we're in. We may have a particular model that we're following, whether it's a particular problem solving model or lean model, whatever it is. Can we assess the organization to the department or plant level that shows how we are performing as the ability to adopt these new models? That's important too. So we're a nurturing teaching organization, but we have to balance that with performance for the company, and that's where that alignment into safety and delivery and quality and cost that are for us as well. It's not, it can't be one or the other, and it's really a balancing act when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's do you guys at East Penn track things like hard savings or cost savings impact specifically?
Yes, we do.
You do. I know one thing that folks find interesting in this discipline, a lot of the conversations I have when it comes to hard savings, people are looking for insights on like what percent of revenue turnover or total costs should a again, this differs everywhere. So I like to ask folks like in your organization, is there a kind of a rule of thumb that you like to use to say, yeah, this is what we should target each year?
In my travels, I found that that was highly dependent upon the maturity of the program. And again, if you're just getting into something, you may not, you know, put a 10%, you know,
Yeah.
of their budget is will be taken care of hard savings. That might be for a more mature organization that has seen the ability. What should be taken with a grain of salt too is how lean you've already been up to that point.
Yeah.
Theoretically, if you have been, utilizing these right processes, you are getting better, and so potentially it may be more difficult to find those vast improvements of savings. Historically, what I've seen is that 1 to 3%, but like I said, it depended upon the maturity of the program and the type of business that you were in as well. Obviously, what type of margins? Some companies have 60% margins, and some have 5 to 10. So that is also going to sway where we put our toys.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Those numbers fit well with things that I've heard repeated by others. Particularly the 1 to 3% with lots of caveats, right? Like, if you're early tracking it and you find some huge opportunities, like things could be a lot different.
Well, what is that, Keith? That's your cost of living, right?
Yeah,
So if I can keep everything, and still maintain, the monetary, bump for the folks that are the working force, then I at least need that cost of savings, that usually is the baseline that they go for.
I think that's a pretty good insight too, because I think whether you're responsible for putting the financials together for a business or whether you're working in a business, like, sure, everybody wants to get a pay raise this year. Well, we probably can't all do that if the company doesn't grow or if we don't make the company more efficient, right? Like we kind of have this obligation to improve productivity overall. I mean, there's a general guideline that I like to share with folks, which is just stuff that I've heard is, hey, if you're running a CI program and it costs you $100,000, make sure that your CI program contributes more than $100,000. If your CI program costs you 1 million, make sure it contributes more than $1 million. The one thing that I've seen is we probably a lot of us in this industry or familiar with this have probably seen the outcome where the CI program gets cut or the headcount gets cut or the program gets cut entirely. Have you ever seen that happen? And is there any learning lessons and things that to learn from through those experiences?
Absolutely. And you hit it on the head there, Keith. It's sometimes if it's not well documented or well understood exactly, where that value is targeting, from your CI group, if it just comes down to math of, okay, we're paying this much and what are we seeing? Those are obviously conversations that go on. But it's very important to also note that your CI department, I believe, is much better served as one, less reliant on consultants. I think having homegrown talent, I think is very key, especially as we talked about the relationship building and
Yeah.
people feel more open to improve and share ideas when that goes on. But also when you talk about your CI group, it is interesting because I know, and it's one of the things we think about here all the time is we want to get to the point where we don't necessarily need a CI department. All these methodologies and all these approaches are just woven into, what we do every day, right? So that would be utopian and we would all find other things to do within the organization. But I think that's why it's key that people that are in your organization in a CI role, that if they are a black belt or a green belt, that it's not Keith as a black belt doing his 3 projects a year. He is utilized more as a coach and mentor dozens of those CI type efforts going on in an organization. I think, and that's how you spread, that education, that expertise, and then the value comes back to you in tenfold versus what Keith may have been able to recoup for us in those 3 projects each year.
I think that's a really good insight that one of the most important things in a CI role, a CI department, first of all, there's a saying that I like that if you don't have one, you are one. So if I'm a CEO and I don't have a CI department, I am the CI department, right? Like if I'm a plant manager and I don't have a continuous improvement manager, I by default am the continuous improvement manager. Because let's be honest, there really is no such thing as if somebody will just do that thing. If I hire somebody to do my lawn and I teach everybody in the family how to mow the lawn, and then I fire the guy that mows the lawn, the chances that somebody in my family is going to go mow the lawn without being told specifically to do so are pretty low. So, but I think the lesson that you're sharing is that if our continuous improvement departments get stuck in a rut where it's like, hey, this is what we do these trainings per year, or we just do this, and we kind of lose that lens on how can we continue to improve value. That's probably something that another person would look at our situation and say, hey, have you thought about this?
Yes, it's not just the training business. It can't just be that.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. I agree with you that it's something that you want to continue to get as many people thinking that way as possible. This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire, the all-in-one platform for continuous improvement. With KPI Fire, you can align strategy, drive execution, and engage your people. So whether you're leading a team or driving enterprise-wide change, KPI Fire helps you deliver real results. Learn more at www.kpifire.com. You touched on something that's been interesting to me lately, and I tend to find this particularly in IT folks. And again, being in the software business, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but just saying this is something I recognize. There's a difference between doing the work of improvement. I think there's a lot of people that are just good at fixing problems and doing stuff. I think a lot of people that find their way to this as a career path are just good at fixing problems. They like to make things better. They like to help other people. And that's part of what draws us to this. But I also think that a lot of people that do really great work, if you don't share that work and if you don't think about what did I learn, what did I do that I can share with others, that that the saying, if a tree falls in the forest and so no one's there to hear it, does it really make a sound? If you make an improvement in your business but you don't share that improvement and learn from that improvement as an organization, have you really made an improvement? And so that's one of the things that I often think about is the value of doing the improvement versus recognizing the improvement and documenting it and sharing with others. Something I think about as, kind of uniquely a CI function. The plant managers never going to be as concerned about sharing the good things that they're doing in their plant as kind of an independent role, because they probably get a little bit of pride in that company-wide meeting where their plant's doing a little bit better. I think that there's, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting insight. I don't know if you've experienced that at all.
You bring up a number of interesting points there, Keith. And I don't know if you were kind of touching on the sometimes competitive nature between plants that you may have. Maybe
But
there
plant managers can be competitive too.
there should never be a hesitance to share, especially and this is probably a topic for another time, if your bonus structure is set up in a way that has a forced bell curve, then where do I want to stay in that bell curve? And does it bode well for me to transfer this learning to someone else? And that's something that, like I said, should never have a hesitance about. And those are some that we really want to make sure we build into these improvement systems is when those nuggets come along that are absolutely beneficial across the board in so many different like departments or like processes. Not only do we want them shared, you know, yeah, quickly, but also as effectively as we can and referenced when needed as easily as we could. So, you're spot on with, that the transfer of learning, because you probably have a lot of experience as well as when you talk to people about problem solving and formal problem solving training. It's like, what are you talking about? I solve problems every day because trial and error is a problem solving methodology. It's just,
Absolutely.
there's other ways to improve the probability the first thing you select is the right thing. It's what we look at.
Yeah, you touched on something. This is an example, one of those light bulb moments. I mean, one of the stories that I hear frequently is I got into this discipline because I, was good at fixing problems or solving things. And then I learned that there was this like structured problem solving methodology. And I'm like, oh, I'm kind of doing that. Like it's, in some sense, you would say it's intuitive or it's common sense. But, I guess, we probably all realize that common sense isn't always that common. There's usually a way to accelerate that learning. Dan, one note that I had written down from an earlier part of our conversation comes back to this idea of utilization. Every process has like utilization metric. Well, I don't know if they have metrics, maybe they should, but let's say you're creating standard work and you know how many units want to get created on a machine. You could say, hey, this machine has this capacity for X number of units a day. And, you can kind of look at utilization in that way. With a lot of work done by humans, that utilization number is maybe a little bit different. I'm curious if you have any experience on times when utilization should be high or and what I'm getting at is how much time should you have for like the do the work part versus improve the work, right? Like if your capacity is 100, if your utilization is 100%, by definition, there is no time for improvement. Are there any rules of thumb that you might give for how to create that space or that time to think about improvements? And is it different at different levels of the organization?
In general, for a person, a lot depends on the expectations of that role. Obviously, a process engineer supporting the floor versus a professional that has responsibilities in a department or a plant. You you try to keep an eye. At least I know personally, I try to keep an eye on are people being utilized at least in that once they get past that 60-70% and they start to teeter close to 80%. That's to me personally it is a flag because you want to make sure that 20 to 30% can capture, well, as you talked about, vacation and sick and all those things that are have to haves. And, we want to be mindful of those. But also just where's the time for, as you mentioned, process improvement. But what about person improvement? We want to make sure there's time for the development of those people as well. To me, it is still, no easy feat. I don't pretend that it is. We have the business that we're serving, but we also try to balance how are we taking care of the folks that are taking care of our business? If you ask me what the utilization of a typical person would be, that 60 to 80%, depending on what they're doing, is probably that sweet spot so that we can utilize, the time for thoughtful development and obviously taking care of the have to have as well.
That's interesting. I seem to recall 70% when I've seen some like simulation exercises for, various different processes. And I seem to recall like 70% being kind of that, like when you go above 70%, you tend to end up with inventory buildup. And I can't remember. This sounds like something I learned in university or something, but um, what are some things that leaders can do? And this is maybe a leading question towards things like stand-ups or tier meetings to make space for the conversation of improvements. Um,
Yes, and this is where I have absolute empathy for our frontline personnel and the people that manage and support them as well. Because when you're in a continuous manufacturing environment, you know, eh, the machine is running. We want to keep the machine running. As we talked about, how do we free people up to be able to have those thoughtful moments of improvement to apply a 5S learning or do some type of problem solving initiative. So there's a number of different ways that people have approached that, whether it's roving relief, where we have like we do for crews that may need to go on breaks. Do we utilize that, more pronounced way so that we can free people up for 2 to 3 hours on a Thursday morning or whatever it is to be able to engage in that type of effort. So that I think is much more difficult and challenging and requires a lot more creativity than if I want my CI professionals to be able to, have a daily huddle or a weekly huddle. That is much easier to achieve. I think very useful and can be very effective in maintaining that communication path that we talked about and ensuring folks are getting what they need and giving to others what they need as well. So that to me is the two worlds that you sometimes go through is that transactional versus transformational world have two different approaches on how you may need to do things versus you don't want to turn off a transformational world, but there's more opportunities in the transactional world to pause things and make sure you connect in a, like you're saying, a routine way.
yeah, I love that the term routine and ritual because I think that systems in general, particularly systems of improvement, can be built based on a routine structure. Like, what are the things that you need to do every day? What are the things you need to do every week? What are the things you do every month, quarter, year? Those can be the framework. Just like if I'm operating a machine and I'm like, hey, I need to know that I've got this much supply and I need to oil it this often. I think that in leadership roles, the frequency that you do those certain meetings to check in on things is kind of one of the levers, you know. Do I need to do this thing more frequently or less frequently?
Yes.
I want to come back to this leadership idea. Is there a cadence, you know, kind of coming back to this ritual idea that you think senior leaders or maybe leaders at different levels should be like checking a box, checking in on like their support of the CI program? What would be like your best practice for that?
Yeah, and there's a number of different ways for that. Your more strategic initiatives should be checked at least quarterly. And reason I say that is because potentially most of your strategic making extraordinary progress in a couple weeks. These are things that are take a while to nurture, but there are probably pieces as you start to cascade from your strategy. Some project work; those potentially could be looked at, more on a monthly basis, depending on, whether you're looking at a division or you're looking at a plant or department. I think those are the types of things that should be looked at, hopefully in person. If not, then setting up some kind of virtual solution as well. Just as you noted, not just for the highlights of what we got done, but also when we're having some hurdles, let's look at those month to month versus waiting till we got to the end of the year and like, yeah, I wanted to tell you that back in April, but we never had a chance to connect. Folks are doing the best they can. They really are. So it's really up to those leaders. And again, I look at myself as well. I could always do a better job of making sure you're touching base with the people that are depending on you.
Well, Dan, I'd like to just move into the last section here. I call this the rapid fire. So these are just kind of like, you know, simple questions, kind of top of mind answer, phrase, word, whatever comes to mind. The most important job of a leader is to blank.
What we had mentioned several times before is providing that environment of safety along the lines of improving and failing forward, to be there in that regular routine of connecting and communicating.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, I know it's not all about the tools, but I wonder if there's like a particular tool that you find yourself turning to or that you have like as a favorite, you have most ready to pull out and use. Is there one that you have a go to tool for problem solving?
Probably not a big surprise how much you know about me already, Keith. But I might get annoying with the five whys every once in a while. Yeah, I go there and really I'm seeking understanding, but I get it that once you get to that fourth or fifth why, they'll start to look at you pretty funny. But it really does. It shows me better insights into really where we need to go. I feel more confident that I might select the right tool out of the satchel versus if I didn't get past those first few layers, I feel I would run the risk of going down the wrong path.
I love it. Well, one of my questions is, do you have a favorite question? I think I just got the answer to that. Why? Is there a book that you recommend for, let's say somebody is like interested in this CI thing? Is there a book that you would recommend?
It's interesting. Haven't picked up on it. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and a lot of his leadership principles. It's a quick, easy read, but together is better. I know everybody probably knows his Why book, which is a great book as well. But again, staying as people centric as I think we need to be, that together is better book is a really easy and insightful read.
I agree. I love Simon Sinek's stuff. He's always got great insights. What's something that you are excited about currently? What are you looking forward to?
Heck of a question. As soon as you mentioned that, I immediately thought about my kids and all the things that are going on with my son starting his basketball season and my daughter potentially getting an internship at Disney. So as we harken back to your
Oh,
comment on
I
the
love
Disney
it.
World of Battery production, yeah, I connect initially to my family, but here in career wise, I'm very excited about the opportunities that East Penn has set before me and us here at East Penn. There are great things that we can explore together and improve and those types of initiatives and innovations that have been lined up here and shared with a lot of people here at East Penn really tweak that passion and ignite that fire to say, you know what, let's figure this out together and get better where we can and make sure at the end of the day we're supporting our customers where we need to.
That's awesome. Those are great answers. I love the personal ones and the professional ones because I think there's a common thread there that, you know, we get excited about things that we can look forward to, particularly when it's positive change. You know, I think both the examples that you just talked about are kind of fit that as a pattern. That's quite interesting. And I think particularly right now, you know, a lot of the, you know, kind of broader conversation in the world is about AI and what impact AI is going to have. And at least for me, I think that people that are really familiar with the process of change and comfortable with change and how to figure out good change versus bad change, I think it creates a bright future. I don't know if you have any comments on the future of AI in this role or in your industry specifically.
Absolutely. AI will automatically invoke a number of different emotions in a number of different people. And I think it will undoubtedly impact things like CI, especially through the automated analytics and things of that nature. But what people need to keep in mind too is AI can give you all types of options and ideas and information, but it's really up to the people that are in your organization. You still set the vision and mission, right? The AI bot doesn't necessarily know exactly what you have in mind for your particular business. It also doesn't, know what type of taste or appropriateness, in the message that you want to give. And by all means, it definitely doesn't, target the empathy or care that you think that message has to be given and how you interact and engage with the people in your organization. So I think that's something to keep in mind is yes, AI is something that we need to embrace. We need to figure out how it will, improve and complement what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, there's still some inherent human pieces that we need to make sure we cater to.
Absolutely. I love the theme that you brought to this conversation about it's all about the people because particularly, I mean, there's a lot of things that AI is going to, maybe take over and do, but particularly in big companies, large enterprises, AI isn't going to do anything until somebody like you or, one of these change leaders says, "Hey, let's use AI in this way because it's going to be good for the business, good for the people." And so I love that you bring the just that perspective and insight that all of this really is about the people and how much kind of the same things light us all up, I think, at the end of the day, right? It's like we all want to make a difference. We all want to make good change. And I think a lot of the stuff that we talked about, even the tools, these are tools to help do that. Dan, I really appreciate you joining us on the call today. This is a conversation I've wanted to have for quite a while. You're someone that I was looking forward to having a conversation with about this stuff. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Appreciate the invite. Thank you, Keith.
Wonderful. And for our listeners, if you'd like to suggest a guest, ask a question, or give us any ideas for episodes, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Keith Norris, Keith C. Norris, in case there's too many Keith Norrises. And Dan, if somebody wanted to follow up with you, what's the best place to follow you?
LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn? Okay. Wonderful. Thanks again so much, Dan. We really appreciate you. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you have enjoyed today's episode, be sure to add a comment, click that like, follow, subscribe button, give us a comment, share it with a friend, and share it with anybody who is as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.